The jungle's humidity didn't merely linger. It bore down on you, a crushing, suffocating shroud of steam and decay that coated exposed skin and wormed its way through the mesh and plates of our tactical vests. We were 6 hours into the insertion, deep inside a stretch of the Amazon that didn't exist on any civilian map. Intelligence had labeled it simply Zone 4, a nameless void of unbroken green. My unit, call sign Viper 1, was made up of 6 operators: myself, Captain Elias Thorne, Sergeant Miller, our heavy weapons specialist, Specialist Hutch Hutchinson handling comms and tech, Doc Sterling, our medic, and our forward scouts, Ramirez and Cohen. We were Tier 1, men forged in Afghanistan's dust and the dense urban combat of Syria, no strangers to violence or chaos. Yet this place was different. From the instant we fast-roped out of the Blackhawk into a gap in the canopy 3 clicks south of the objective, a sense of unease settled over us. It wasn't just the heat or the terrain, though both were brutal. The jungle was a maze of tangled vines, knife-edged ferns, and sucking mud that clung to our boots like it wanted to pull us under. What truly set the nerves on edge was the silence. The Amazon should have been deafening, swarms of insects, shrieking birds, distant primates echoing through the trees. Instead, there was nothing. No chirps, no calls, not even the whine of mosquitoes. Just the wet slap of boots against rotting plant matter and the steady, strained breathing of men hauling 80 pounds of gear through choking foliage. The briefing had been deliberately thin, typical of CIA-backed operations that usually meant we were cleaning up something we weren't meant to understand. The mission was classified as asset recovery. Satellite data had detected a heat bloom followed by the crash of an experimental drone. At least, that's what we were told, carrying a payload deemed extremely sensitive. Our orders were straightforward: find the crash site, secure the asset, and destroy what remained using thermite. Standard procedure. But the deeper we moved into the jungle's green twilight, the more it felt less like an environment and more like an adversary. The trees loomed impossibly large, their roots coiling through the soil like fossilized serpents. The canopy above was so dense it erased the midday sun, trapping us in a dim, perpetual dusk. I raised a clenched fist, signaling a halt. The team stopped instantly, melting into the vegetation as weapons swept outward. Hutchinson slid up beside me, his camo-streaked face noticeably pale. "Captain," he whispered, barely audible over the ringing in my ears, "I'm getting interference. Comms are degrading. This isn't atmospheric, it's rhythmic." I checked my own radio. The static came in pulses, a low-frequency hum that resonated through my jaw and teeth. It didn't sound mechanical. It felt organic, like a heartbeat. "Keep trying to boost the signal," I ordered, glancing down at the GPS unit. The display flickered, the directional arrow spinning erratically before finally locking in. 1 click out. I looked to Ramirez at point. He was staring into the thick undergrowth with an intensity one rarely saw in him. "What do you see?" I asked. "Nothing, Cap," he answered, tightening his grip on his 18 Malawian kwaches. "That's the issue. No tracks. No wildlife. It's like everything that lives here just evacuated." We continued forward. The silence grew denser, the air sharp with a metallic tang, ozone heavy, like the moments before a storm breaks. The jungle wasn't simply quiet. It was waiting. We reached the coordinates at 1,400 hours, though the light suggested midnight. The crash site lay in a natural depression, a crater-like basin encircled by limestone cliffs that thrust up from the jungle floor like shattered teeth. As we crested the ridge and looked down into the hollow, the smell reached us first. It wasn't jet fuel or scorched plastic, the usual signatures of a wreck. Instead, the air reeked of copper and ozone, overlaid with a nauseatingly sweet odor, decaying flowers, magnolias left to rot in the sun. Miller gagged, tugging his face wrap higher. "Jesus, what is that?" he muttered. At the center of the clearing below rested the object. It had gouged a 300-meter scar through the earth, snapping ancient mahogany trees like twigs before coming to rest, half sunken in mud. I raised my binoculars, trying to impose logic on what I was seeing. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't anything that had ever rolled off a Lockheed Martin or Boeing production line. The craft, if that word even applied, was roughly the size of a C-130 transport, but it lacked wings, intakes, or any visible means of propulsion. Its shape was a smooth teardrop, its surface coated in a matte, vanilla-black material that swallowed ambient light instead of reflecting it. Yet the most unsettling aspect was how it affected the jungle around it. Where the hull met the forest floor, the vegetation wasn't burned, it had been altered. Grass and vines surrounding the wreck had turned a translucent, unhealthy gray, growing at a visible pace. They pulsed and stretched toward the black mass, drawn to it like iron filings to a magnet. "Hutch, take photos," I ordered, my voice tight. We descended the slope, spacing disciplined, weapons covering arcs. As we closed the distance, the temperature plummeted. In less than 50 yards, the air shifted from a suffocating 90 degrees to a bone-deep 40. Our breath fogged white in front of our faces. I approached the hull with my weapon raised, half expecting something to erupt from within. Up close, the surface wasn't smooth. It was textured, rippled like muscle fiber or scarred flesh. I hesitated, then reached out with a gloved hand and touched it. The material was ice cold, but it vibrated beneath my palm. A low hum traveled up my arm, settling deep in my bones. "Captain," Doc Sterling called from the rear of the craft. "You need to see this." I moved to him. The back of the object had been ruptured, torn open as though something had forced its way out from the inside. The edges weren't twisted metal, they resembled shredded cartilage. Thick, viscous slime leaked from the breach, glowing faintly blue as it dripped and pooled on the ground. In that pool lay the first evidence of the previous recovery team. A standard-issue U.S. Army boot, foot still inside, severed cleanly just above the ankle. There was no blood. The exposed flesh had crystallized, transformed into something resembling quartz. "Intel said we were first on site," Miller whispered, his machine gun sweeping the treeline. "Intel lied," I said flatly. "Sweep the area. Set a defensive perimeter. I want to know what killed this man, and where the rest of him went." The dread was no longer abstract. It had hardened into something real and unavoidable. We weren't here to recover hardware. We had stepped into a crime scene where the laws of physics no longer held jurisdiction. We set a perimeter around the breach, but the jungle itself began to betray us. Shadows stretched unnaturally, peeling away from the trees as if they had substance of their own. The static in our headsets shifted, resolving into whispers, layered, incoherent voices, all overlapping, all sounding like they were pleading for help. Hutchinson was hunched over the SAT comm, hands flying, panic etched across his face. He was shaking. "I can't get a lock, Cap. The frequencies won't hold. Every channel I find gets blocked, like something's actively jamming us. Intentionally." I sent Miller and Ramirez to sweep the nearest treeline. They'd been gone less than 5 minutes when Ramirez's voice burst over the comms, sharp and breaking with fear. "Contact, no wait, Jesus Christ, Captain, you need to get here. Now." I left Sterling guarding the breach and pushed into the trees with Cohen at my back. About 50 meters from the crash, we found Ramirez frozen in a small clearing, staring at a tree. Or what had once been a tree. Fused into the trunk, roughly 5 feet off the ground, was the torso of a man. A soldier. The shredded remnants of multicam fatigues clung to him. He wasn't bound or impaled, he was integrated. His skin had merged seamlessly with the bark. His arms were warped outward, stretched into limbs that branched unnaturally, fingers elongated into twigs sprouting dull gray leaves. His face was locked in an expression of absolute agony, mouth wide in a soundless scream. But his eyes were alive. They flicked wildly between me and Ramirez, glossy, human, and terrified. "Help me," the tree whispered. The sound didn't come from lungs or a throat. It resonated through the wood itself. I staggered back, ball rising in my chest. "Kill me," the thing rasped. It absorbs. It takes." I recognized the patch on his shoulder. 75th Ranger Regiment. The Tier 1 team command had claimed went dark. They hadn't disappeared. They'd been harvested. "Doc!" I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by a sudden, piercing shriek from the crash site. It was the sound of tearing metal fused with something animal and predatory. "Ambush!" Miller screamed over the radio, immediately followed by the thunderous roar of his M249 saw. "They're coming out of the trees. They're not human. There." The transmission collapsed into static. I looked back at the soldier embedded in the tree. There was nothing I could do for him. I raised my rifle and fired a single round into his forehead, ending it. The tree convulsed, and sapped the color and thickness of black blood seeped from the wound. "Move! Back to the site!" I shouted. We ran, but the jungle had transformed. Vines lashed violently, striking like living serpents. The ground buckled and rippled beneath our boots. When we burst back into the crater, we saw them. They weren't men. Tall and unnaturally thin, their skin shared the same matte-black finish as the craft. They moved in jerks and spasms, too fast and disjointed for the eye to properly follow. They swarmed across the hull, closing in on Miller and Sterling, who were pinned down. But they weren't firing. They were reaching, desperate to touch. The firefight that followed was unlike anything I'd faced in 2 decades of war. "Open fire!" I shouted, dropping to one knee as I engaged the closest target. My rounds struck center mass. Under normal conditions, a controlled double tap of 5.56 would drop a man instantly. These things didn't react at all. The bullets sank into their black, shifting skin, the impacts rippling outward like stones tossed into water. The creature turned its head toward me, if you could call it a head. It was a smooth, featureless oval with no eyes, no mouth. Then it moved. The 30-meter distance vanished in an instant, crossed faster than biology should allow. I rolled aside just as a clawed limb smashed into the mud where I'd been, the impact cracking the rock beneath the surface. "Headshots! Joints!" Miller bellowed, his M249 saw screaming as the barrel glowed red, rounds pouring non-stop into the swarm. He managed to tear an arm from one of them. The creature emitted a sound, digital broken, like a modem screaming from hell, before collapsing and dissolving into a spreading pool of gray sludge. We tightened into a back-to-back circle, an improvised Alamo. There were maybe 10 of them, but they moved so fast it felt like far more. Worse, they were adapting. I watched 2 peel off and flank right, using cover with practiced efficiency, while the others pressed us head-on with relentless aggression. They weren't just attacking. They were learning. Hutch screamed. I spun in time to see one of the entities seize him by the vest. It didn't strike. It simply placed a hand against his chest. Hutch went rigid, eyes rolling back as black, necrotic veins burst outward from the contact point, racing up his neck in seconds. "No!" Cohen lunged, tackling the thing and driving his combat knife into where a neck should have been. The creature shrieked and released Hutch, who crumpled to the ground, convulsing violently. "Grenades! Frag out!" I yanked the pin from an M67 and hurled it into the center of the cluster. The blast erupted in mud and shrapnel, stunning them just long enough. "Fall back! LZ now! Drag Hutch!" I shouted. Miller and I laid down a solid wall of suppressive fire as Ramirez and Cohen hauled Hutch to his feet. We fought our way uphill, firing blindly through smoke and debris. The jungle had fully awakened. Roots snared our boots. Branches whipped at our faces. The low hum from the ship had swelled into a crushing roar, bursting noses and spinning the world sideways. As we crested the ridge, I glanced back. The creatures weren't chasing us. They stood motionless near the craft, watching. Then the dead rangers, the ones we hadn't yet found, began to rise from the mud. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, their bodies manipulated by black vines that had threaded deep into their flesh like marionette strings. The ship wasn't just transport. It was a terraforming engine, and it was repurposing us as feedstock. The run to the exfiltration point existed in my memory not as a sequence of clear events, but as a violent smear of adrenaline, fear, and instinct. Time fractured into meaningless shards. My legs moved without conscious command, boots pounding through mud and undergrowth as branches clawed at my face and tactical gear snagged on vines thick as cables. Every breath burned. Every sound felt amplified, the snap of twigs, the rasp of our breathing, the distant, unnatural groan of the jungle itself. Somewhere behind us, something vast shifted, and the ground vibrated faintly beneath our feet, as if the earth were reacting to our presence like a disturbed hive. We carried Hutch between us, his weight increasing with every meter as though gravity itself had decided to claim him early. His body was stiffening, not with rigor mortis, but with something far worse. His skin had lost all trace of warmth and color, turning an ashen gray that reflected light dully, like unpolished stone. Where sweat had soaked through his uniform minutes earlier, there was now only dryness. His flesh felt brittle beneath my gloves. When he moved, which was less and less often, his joints resisted with an audible grind that sent a wave of nausea through me. Hutch was muttering continuously, lips cracked and bleeding, forming words that made no sense. It wasn't Spanish. It wasn't any indigenous dialect intelligence had briefed us on. It wasn't even language as we understood it, just a pattern of sounds, sharp and rhythmic, like something being recited from memory by a mouth that no longer understood meaning. I tried not to listen, but the cadence wormed its way into my head, syncing with my heartbeat. Ramirez vomited while running, choking and swearing as he wiped bile from his chin and kept moving. We burst into the extraction zone, a small, roughly circular clearing carved from the jungle 2 clicks north of the crash site. The canopy above had been partially blown open by a previous storm, allowing moonlight to spill down in pale shafts that cut through drifting mist. I nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of open ground. My hands shook violently as I dug the IR smoke grenade from my vest. I pulled the pin and threw it hard, watching the thick plume bloom upward like a signal flare to God himself. Viper 1 to command. I shouted into the handset, my voice cracking despite years of training. Immediate extraction requested. We are combat ineffective. Heavy casualties. We have a biological contagion. The words felt insufficient, childish even, but they were all I had. I waited for the reassuring snap of command protocol, the calm voice on the other end grounding me back in reality. There was nothing. Only static answered me, a flat, dead sound that stretched on far too long. My stomach tightened. Around us, the jungle seemed to lean inward, leaves trembling despite the absence of wind. Somewhere to the south, the same low-frequency hum we'd heard at the crash site pulsed again, so deep it bypassed hearing and went straight into the bones. Hutch spasmed in our arms, his head snapping up as his eyes opened wide, pupils blown completely black. Then the radio crackled. "Copy Viper 1, a pilot's voice said, calm and professional, like a lifeline thrown into open water. "Kingfish inbound. ETA 2 mics." I almost laughed. I almost cried. 2 minutes had never sounded so beautiful or so impossibly long. The thudding of rotor blades cut through the night before the Black Hawk came into view, its running lights slicing between trees as it descended. The downdraft tore into the clearing, shredding foliage, flattening grass, and ripping leaves from branches like shrapnel. The helicopter's wash blew the canopy apart above us, sending debris spiraling into the air. We dragged Hutch forward, his boots leaving shallow grooves in the dirt like he weighed 3 times as much as he should. The crew chief waved us in, eyes widening briefly at Hutch's condition before snapping back to discipline. We heaved him onto the deck, his body landing with a dull, solid thud that made the crewmen flinch. I climbed last, boots scraping against the skids as the helicopter lifted even before I was fully inside. For a brief, terrible second, I hung between air and metal, the jungle yawning beneath me. As we rose, I looked down one final time. The jungle was moving, not swaying, not shifting in the wind, moving deliberately. A ripple of gray spread outward from the crash site like an infection beneath skin, consuming the vibrant greens and deep blacks of the Amazon. Trees stiffened and froze midsway, leaves dulling and losing color as they hardened. The earth itself lightened, cracked spiderwebbing across its surface as life turned to mineral. It was beautiful in a horrifying way, a petrified ocean rolling outward, unstoppable, patient. It was spreading fast. They flew us directly to a black site facility off the coast of Florida. No hospital, no medevac protocols, no comfort. The moment we touched down, men in sealed suits took over. We were stripped of gear, clothing, dignity. They hosed us down with chemicals that burned the skin and made my eyes water until I thought I'd go blind. The smell clung to me, sharp, sterile, wrong. They shaved our heads, scraped under our nails, swabbed places I didn't know could be swabbed. Then they locked us away. Isolation cells. Concrete. Glass. White light that never turned off. I didn't see my team for 3 weeks. Time lost meaning. Sleep came in broken fragments, haunted by the sound of stone grinding against stone. I dreamt of trees screaming as they hardened, of Hutch standing upright and unblinking, skin fully crystallized, mouth still moving. Sometimes I woke convinced my own fingers were stiffening, pressing them desperately into my palms just to feel softness. When they finally came for me, it wasn't a medical officer. It was a man in a suit. He didn't give his name. He didn't sit casually. He placed a single sheet of paper on the steel table between us and slid it forward with one finger. His eyes never left mine. He didn't ask me what we saw. He told me. "Captain Thorne," he said evenly, "you encountered a downed cartel drug plane. There were booby traps. Chemical agents used to protect the product caused hallucinations and sickness. Specialist Hutchinson died of an allergic reaction to a local toxin." The words landed like blunt force trauma. I stared at him, hands trembling beneath the table as my body rejected the lie on a physical level. "Hutch is dead?" I asked, my voice hollow, fragile. "He is," the man said without hesitation. "And for the sake of your family and the families of your team, that is the story you will tell." I swallowed hard. "The area has been firebombed," he continued, already standing, already done with me, "to destroy the narcotics." He paused at the door. "One last thing, Captain," he said, not turning around. "What you saw out there, it's been there for 1,000 years. We just woke it up." I signed the paper. I retired 2 months later. Now I can't sleep. I keep seeing the soldier in the tree, fused into bark and bone. I keep seeing the way Hutch's skin lost its humanity, molecule by molecule. And sometimes, when the world is quiet enough, I hear that low-frequency hum again, vibrating in my teeth, rattling something deep inside my skull. I know they didn't kill it with firebombs. You can't kill something that isn't alive. They're studying it. And one day it's going to break out. The jungle was just the incubator. We are the food.